Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and I'm here for an individual movie review. Oh my god, that's a thing? That's what we do on this channel? Yes, it is. I know, it's crazy. It's been quite a bit since I've put out a actual individual movie review, but whatever, we're here for the first individual movie review of 2024. It's a new year, we're moving forward, and of course we're talking about Night. In this film, we focus on the Waller family, but specifically Ray Waller, who used to be this very famous baseball player, but recently has contracted MS. So because of that, he is now moving into a new house with his wife and two kids. And, you know, he's kind of trying to start afresh, and they end up finding out there is a swimming pool within the backyard. He kind of hopes that this is a way to, you know, give his kids a fun experience, but also kind of help him cope with potential physical therapy to maybe get him back into shape and get him back on the, you know, get him back into doing what he loves. But as things start to go on and the family moves into this house, there's some weird happenings that start to occur, and various members of the family start to realize that there may be something a little bit more sinister lurking behind this body of water than they may have. So, Night Swim, listen, it's the first week of January. Well, now it's the second week of January, but like when the movie came out, it's the first week of January, of course. So my expectations are obviously not going to be that high. I really did not have many expectations for this whatsoever. The marketing did almost nothing for me. There was a second trailer at some point. I only watched the first trailer, which told us very little about the movie. It gave us like a jump scare that I thought was just so cheap and lame, and it really didn't do much of anything for me. But I was trying to be somewhat optimistic because last year's January actually turned out to be pretty solid. We had Megan, which I was dreading, and that actually turned out to be really good. We had Plane, which I thought was gonna be terrible. It was just okay, but it wasn't the complete like disaster I thought was gonna be. Even Missing, which I thought was going to be like a lesser version of Searching, actually turned out to be pretty good. So I was really hoping that maybe Night Swim could potentially continue this trend of January not being this dumping ground for movies and not being the worst thing ever, because the last couple Januaries honestly have given us some films that really haven't been that bad. So I was really hoping going into this that this could maybe deliver, although my hopes really weren't that high, just considering just how cheap and generic it looked. And unfortunately, lightning did not strike twice. Yeah, this is very much a January film. It's not terrible, I'll say that. It's not terrible, but it is every bit as just dull and generic and familiar as you are expecting a horror film, a January horror film to really be, and really just doesn't do much of anything to really stick out or leave any sort of long-lasting impression. But we are, of course, going to just start off here with the cast here. And I will say, for a movie that honestly does not have a lot of effort or passion really put into it, the acting is definitely one of the stronger elements of this film. I think most of the performances are really strong here. I think everyone does do a pretty solid job, starting off with Wyatt Russell. I've always really liked him and stuff, and I feel like recently he's had a bit of a surge. You know, he was in Overlord, and since then I feel like I've just been seeing him in a lot more stuff, and he's really just been impressing me as an actor. I feel like he's very charismatic. He is very good at playing very just sort of very rough around the edges type characters. And here I think he does a really good job playing this character of Ray, who throughout the film is very conflicted. On one hand, he, you know, understands why this pool is here, and he's trying to do what he can to, you know, get back into doing what he loves. But on the other hand, he also is trying to provide for his family. And he actually ends up having some more emotional moments in the film that I thought were actually pretty genuine. There's some really good stuff with him, you know, in the first two acts of this movie that I thought were pretty strong, and I thought that he did do a really good job. And even in the moments where the movie wasn't really working, he still was able to elevate it. His performance still was pretty good throughout. I enjoyed what he ended up doing here, and I thought that he overall did a really good job in this film. But I gotta say, easily the best part of this movie is Kerry Condon as Eve Waller, which you really shouldn't be shocked about. She just came off of an incredible performance in The Banshees of Inisherin. I have no idea why this is the project that she followed that up with, because I feel like she is a far more capable actress than this. But I will say, for a movie that really doesn't give her much to work with. She really just pours her heart and soul into this performance. Eve is someone who really is just trying to keep her family together. Things have kind of become fractured ever since, Ray's diagnosis. And so you can see that there's just a lot of mounted pressure on her, and she's really just trying to do what she can to, just keep everyone healthy, happy within her family. There's a really great scene, especially that I thought was very effective from her. And, we'll get into her character a little bit, but I thought overall she was just very good in this movie. It really did feel like she was putting a lot of effort into this. And the movie, surprisingly, it does give her more to work with than I expected. And I thought overall she did do a really good job here. And I think these two performances really do hold it together. The two kids that are here, they're fine for what they have. Amélie Hoeferle, I've never really seen her before as Izzy. I feel like she gave a pretty good performance here. Nothing incredible, but I did think she did a good job. And then Gavin Moran, I thought actually was really good in this movie as Elliot. I definitely really did like what he ended up doing in this film. I thought, for what he was given, he really did make the most out of his performance, and I really did enjoy him here. Unfortunately, some of the other performances really just didn't end up working for me, especially one involving this pool cleaner I thought was particularly silly, as well as this one character that I'm not going to get into much, that our character comes across and involves a confrontation at a house, I thought was just really overdoing it in this film. It does feel like the actors at some points are confused by whether or not they're supposed to play this grounded or whether they're supposed to be a little bit more over the top, but I think the ones that are good, and it's certainly one of the better elements of this movie. Right, now let's get to the directing and the writing here, which I hate to be super negative towards, because Bryce McGuire, this is his directorial debut, and, I do think that he does have a future. He made a short film of this same movie and things like that. And I will say, I do think that he absolutely does have some kind of a future. I can definitely see that he wanted this to be something. I just don't think he's quite there yet. Now, I will say, when talking about his directing, there's honestly, you kind of have to break it down into two chunks. When we are talking about the family drama elements of this movie, I think he actually does that pretty well. He does a good job of, giving you enough, to latch on to. He really does a good job of making you care for this family early on and things like that, and I think that part works really well. The problem is when he tries to delve deeper into the horror roots, it just really doesn't end up working out all that much. I don't think his directing really leaves any sort of impact. It just feels very copy and paste. It feels very much like he's just borrowing elements from other directors. And like I said, I think maybe one day he can get there, but not yet. I just don't think this was a great first film to start out with. I understand, yes, this is based off a short film, but I think if he really wanted to prove his talents, he needed to do something a little bit different, because his directing just really doesn't end up working in this movie, really just ends up falling apart with the way he ends up going about it, especially, like I said, the horror elements are just not really working at all. It just feels very uninspired. It feels like he kind of wanted to play it safe in his directorial debut, so he kind of just took a page out from, a short he had done all the way back in, I believe, 2014 is when that came out, which is crazy. But the problem is he didn't know how to adapt it to feature length, and because of that, he just doesn't really have much of a vision here. I feel like if he's directing a drama, he honestly would be pretty good. I don't know if horror is his strong suit. I really don't. I don't know if this is the lane that he needs to go. So I don't want to say that he doesn't have any talent, because I haven't seen future projects for him, but this is definitely not a great first effort. I really was not that impressed by his directing. Let's get into the screenplay, though, for this movie, because I will say this is one of the elements that did somewhat surprise me with this film. Remember, this is the first movie of January, so my expectations are going to be very low in terms of a screenplay. I'm not expecting to get much of anything in terms of characterization here, and I do think the film does a somewhat decent job. When it comes to the character of Ray, I actually think the film does a pretty good job of fleshing him out. We really do kind of dive dive into the limitations of what he's dealing with, and kind of him hearkening back to when he was a baseball player and wanting to get that energy back, and why this pool is so important to him and things like that. There's a really good scene, especially involving a baseball practice, that I thought was particularly effective when it came to Ray as a character, and I thought they did an okay job with that. But for everything it does well, it's not doing it as well as I think it really could have been. It's one of those instances where, like, you watch this movie and you think about, like, what if A24 was behind this? Or what if, like, Neon was behind this? And how much better stuff like this could have been conveyed. Because the elements they're going for with Ray is far more psychological, and I really think that a different studio that's not Blumhouse could have really dived into that a lot more, because Blumhouse is always known for just pretty straightforward horror films. Yes, occasionally they like to change things up and they like to go a little bit more weird, but you're not going to see a lot of really creative and, like, psychological elements in Blumhouse films. You're just not. You're going to see pretty relatively straightforward horror stuff. And I feel like with a different studio, I think they absolutely could have conveyed this. I think McGuire absolutely could have dived into, this a little bit more, where we kind of get to see, why Ray is so attached to the pool. Because we do get to see it, but it's a very surface level of, oh, well, it's helping me and things like that. And as the film goes on, you really just start to dislike this character because of just how completely in denial he is and what's really going on, and it just doesn't really end up working out. And this also is very much the case for the character of Eve, who I do think, again, we have a pretty surface level of the responsibilities that she's dealing with and how much this injury, how much this diagnosis from her husband is, like, taking a toll on her. But again, it's very straightforward. Kerry Condon does elevate the material, admittedly, but she really is not that great of material. She really is just the concerned wife. She's trying to keep everybody together, and I feel like there should have been a lot more to her character, because halfway through this film, she basically becomes the main character, and she's just not that compelling to watch. Like I said, Condon's great in the role, but I just didn't feel her character was as interesting as she needed to be. And so while I thought at first the movie kind of had me for a little bit, I really did feel like, okay, but where are we really going with this? Are we going to dive deeper into what's really going on? And they really don't do that. I think if they really wanted to get us to latch onto these characters, the movie should have started out, the movie really should have started out with us seeing Ray before before his diagnosis and how he used to be as a baseballer. We always see, like, glimpses of it, but it's never enough. Like, you can show me the same shot over and over again of him, hitting a home run or whatever, but it's not gonna give me any more of an impact than it did the first time. Like, after a while, you're just kind of playing the same thing over and over, and I'm just feeling really annoyed because I don't feel like I'm getting any new insight into these characters, and that just really annoyed me. Now, there is a really good scene between Eve and her daughter, but again, I feel like that's more Kerry Condon's delivery. I don't really think that's anything her character was given in this movie, so again, that's something that very much lacks here. And then when it comes to the kids in this film, forget about it. There's really nothing given to either of them. We see with Elliot that he is kind of looking up to his dad and he wants to kind of emulate him, but it's a very minimal arc. They really don't do all that much. He very quickly just becomes the kid that's like, oh, the pool is haunted, there's something going on, but oh my god, nobody believes him because he's just a kid and he doesn't know what he's talking about. So they do that whole sort of trope within that doesn't really work. And then Izzy, really, they give nothing to her. There's a bit of a subplot between her and this guy she likes, but it really doesn't end up going much of anywhere. I honestly feel his character is really just there so they can have a moment in the trailer of her being scared. But they really don't give anything to her character-wise, and that just really ended up disappointing me, because again, I feel like the potential was there, but the problem is, this movie's not really concerned about any of that. This movie doesn't care about necessarily giving character development. What it cares about is trying to scare you. That's its main focus from the get-go. It makes it obvious that that's its focus from the get-go, and unfortunately, when it comes to the horror elements of this film, that is easily the weakest part of this movie. From the beginning, it's clear that this movie wants to be just a traditional horror film. And I wouldn't have a problem with that if A, the movie was scary, or if B, the story was somewhat compelling. And unfortunately, neither of that is the case. The scares in this movie are, again, they're just so incredibly bland. You see every single one of them coming. There's not a single moment in this movie that shocked me, that surprised me. Everything they did in terms of the scares, whether it was a jump scare early on, whether it was, something that happens later on in the film, every single one was was unsurprising to me. Oh, the sound cuts out for a second. Oh my God, there's a loud bang. Oh my God, there's something going on in the pool. Why are you still continuing to go in this fucking pool when every time someone has gone in, like, something bad has happened? Like, what are you even doing? There's one scene at a party especially that really infuriated me. It's like, you literally have heard what is going on. Why are you even risking it? It just really pissed me off. And then it feels like the movie almost kind of forgot what it was trying to do. It almost feels like at first they're just going with this like possession angle and you think that's what they're going to do. But then as the movie goes on, they start to dive more into like the origins of this pool and what's really going on here. And once they do that, the movie goes completely off the fucking rails and generally has no idea what it wants to be anymore. After this point, the movie just completely lost me. They dive into this whole other idea that they were trying to set up, and it's like, okay, this is a fine idea, but like, you needed to kind of pepper that throughout the film, and they really didn't do that, and so it just comes across as more random than anything. It comes across as them just not really knowing how they wanted to end the movie, and so because of that, they just went for like the biggest shrug of an ending possible, because I don't understand what they're trying to do. I don't understand how this all came to be. I don't understand why people are still falling for what's going on. It just doesn't really come together. There's this whole other side to things where there's like other things that have happened with this pool before. It just really ends up falling apart. And so, yeah, the script here, it's really just not great at all. It's the definition of like, Bryce McGuire made this short and it's probably very effective. I haven't seen it, but from what I've heard people say, it's very effective. But when you have to then turn it into something that's a lot longer, and make it like an hour and 30-minute movie, it just isn't able to sustain its momentum. And I think that's the best way to sum it up. I think if he really wanted to make an impact, he just needed to make a different movie. Like, that's just the best way to describe it. Or just need to be completely revised, because as it is, this is just way too convoluted and by the end ridiculous for me to even somewhat be invested in what's going on. By the end, I had a really hard time taking it seriously because I just think it just completely lost sight of its potential. And so, yeah, the script just really ends up falling apart here. Cinematography-wise, I mean, the movie isn't bad to look at necessarily, but if you're looking for like creepy, like creature designs and things like that, the film is very much lacking in that aspect. And I think that's something else that really does hurt the movie. It just doesn't really have a distinct enough look to it. Even the scenes that are in the pool just feel very uninspired. It feels like they had one idea and they just kept doing it over and over and over again, and the movie just doesn't really have any new tricks after a while, and I feel like that's where it really does fail. It's not just that the scares are lame, it's that they just don't even know what they really want to do. How are they trying to scare you? What exactly is out there? Like, it just doesn't really end up coming together, and I think the cinematography just really ends up failing in this movie. Again, it's not like bad or anything, but it doesn't really stick out. It's really nothing that great. I do think that some moments, look interesting, and I think there was definitely a way to make this scary, but as is, it's literally just someone in a pool. Like, there's just not, they don't really do much to scare you, and I think there were definitely different approaches they needed to make this generally effective, but it really doesn't end up working. Like I said, scare-wise, just forget about it. This movie doesn't even try to scare you. I feel like I said, every jump scare I really did see coming. I feel like every moment that was supposed to be somewhat creepy just didn't really end up working for me. Some of them even made me laugh by the way they were played out, so it really didn't end up working out. The score is fine, I guess, and the editing of this movie, I will admit, for the first 40 minutes of this film, it did kind of have me. I thought the movie was actually pretty well paced. I thought, what they were setting up was pretty interesting. But then after a moment involving a pool party, the movie just completely lost me after that. I feel like things just kind of screeched to a halt, and suddenly now we got to wrap up the movie and we got to have this exposition dump of what actually happened, and it just feels like the pacing by the end was just off. It didn't feel like anything that happened by the end this movie was earned. It didn't feel like the directions they ended up going in that third act were satisfying, and it just completely ended up crumbling the whole film for me. So, like I said, while for a little bit it did kind of have me, it just really ended up losing me by the end, and that's really the best way to sum up Night Swim. It's just very disappointing, and I shouldn't be surprised that it turned out this way, but the reason I am is because it did generally have me for a little bit. I do think there are some okay ideas in there. The performances, specifically from Wyatt Russell and Kerry Condon, are not bad. I do think there are some ideas that do kind of work. I think some of the things they did for the characters in the beginning were okay, but the movie really is just sunk by the fact that it is a horror film, and it just completely fails at being one. It doesn't really seem to know what it wants to do. The creativity really isn't there. It tries to have this whole idea at the end of the movie, but by then it just feels way too rushed and hackneyed to really end up working. The climax especially is utterly laughable with the directions it ends up going in, and by the end it just really ends up falling apart. So while, like I said, I did have some faith in the beginning of this film, by the end it just completely lost me and really just had me very annoyed with the directions it ended up going. It's not the worst horror film I've seen, but for the movie that's starting off this year, and considering how things started off last year, if you're expecting a similar trajectory here, this film is very much not that at all. So overall, I am going to give Night Swim a C-. It's January. Yep, it's very much January, and listen, I mean, I'm just excited to get back to hopefully doing this on a more consistent basis. I really do miss doing movie reviews. I really do, and this is just really great to get to review this movie. I wish it was talking about something I liked a little bit more, but I'm hoping the rest of this year does turn out to be pretty good, so we shall see how it does turn out. But anyways, guys, my review of Night Swim. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie. Left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.